This little black girl forced to marry a 70-year-old man for his wealth. 7 days later she discovers his secret. In the blistering heat of the morning sun, Zara, a 12-year-old black girl, stood barefoot on the worn wooden floor of her grandmother's tiny hut. The golden light from the rising sun filtered in through the cracks in the walls, casting a soft glow over her delicate white gown, the same gown once worn by a daughter in a different world, in a different time. But today it was Zara's fate, and the weight of it was too much to bear. Her veil itched, not from the fabric, but from the suffocating reality of her life. Zara's eyes were dry, not because she wasn't grieving, but because the tears had long since run dry. There was nothing left to cry for, no hope to hold on to. Outside, the village murmured with the sound of the onlookers. Women whispered behind their hands. Men looked away in silence. They all knew what was about to happen. Zara was about to marry Mr. Samuel Reynolds, a 70-year-old white man, nearly 6 times her age. He was a stranger, an outsider from another world, another country, and a life so far removed from hers that it seemed unimaginable. He barely spoke the local language. His eyes were cold, and his handshake felt like it was sealing her fate, making her skin crawl. But he had wealth. Wealth Zara's family had none. If you're enjoying Zara's incredible journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's hit 1K subscribers together. Just 2 weeks ago, Zara's little brother had fallen desperately ill. Fever, chills, seizures. The village clinic had turned them away, demanding payment they could not afford. Her mother had sold everything she could, her sewing machine, her wedding ring, even Zara's school books, in a desperate attempt to gather money, but it wasn't enough. And so, Mr. Reynolds had appeared. He was staying at a private lodge high in the mountains, an old American investor who didn't speak of charity or missions. He just had money. And when he saw Zara walking barefoot through the market, trying to buy medicine with the last of her coins, something in his eyes seemed to linger. The very next day, he came to their home with an offer, a bride price large enough to cover her brother's medical treatment and still leave enough for rent, food, and a year's worth of basic necessities. Her mother had fought him, screamed, thrown things in desperation. But when night fell and her brother's fever worsened, Zara's family had no choice but to accept. And Zara, with barely a word and no more tears to cry, had whispered the words, "I'll do it." The ceremony was small. Zara's grandmother tied a thin thread of beads around her neck, an ancient ritual that no longer felt sacred. Tobias Reynolds, in his expensive black suit, stood before her, offering nothing but a cold smile. The elder asked him if he took Zara as his wife, and without a word, Zara nodded. No vows were exchanged. No kiss. Just a nod. A silent agreement. If you're hooked on this story, each click counts. Please subscribe for more, and let's make 1K subscribers happen. That night, Zara sat alone in a strange guest house, far from her home and far from everything she knew. Tobias Reynolds sat across from her, reading a book in a language she couldn't understand. He didn't touch her. He didn't come close. He simply handed her a bowl of soup and said softly, "You should eat." His voice was too gentle. It confused her more than comforted her. He slept in the next room, locking the door between them from his side. Zara stayed awake, clutching a picture of her brother, unsure of what was expected of her. What did he want from her? Wasn't she just a transaction? What had she agreed to? The silence between them was deafening, and Zara couldn't make sense of it. The days that followed were strange and unlike anything Zara had imagined. She had expected cruelty, commands, obedience, punishment. But instead, Tobias treated her like fine glass, not fragile from pity, but valuable. He gave her a room of her own. Clean dresses in soft colors. He served her tea each day at 4 p.m. with honey and a small cookie, wrapped in linen. He never touched her. He never raised his voice. He never looked at her like others had, and that made everything feel even worse. She didn't know what to expect anymore. On the third night, she couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. She quietly stepped toward the door of the library. Inside, Tobias sat, just as he always did, in a worn armchair, bathed in the golden light of a lamp. But this time, something was different. He wasn't reading. He was staring into a mirror, his face pale, lips trembling slightly, as if he were whispering something under his breath. Zara stepped back quietly, but her heart raced. The next morning, Tobias invited her to walk with him through the forest trail behind the lodge. He gave her boots, a scarf, and a notebook. "You should write," he said gently, "even if it's just your thoughts." Zara stared at him, confused. "Why?" she asked. "Because stories make sense of things," he replied, his voice distant. Then he added softly, "And I think you'll need that soon." He said nothing except yes, when the elder asked if he took Zara as his wife. Zara, standing there in a borrowed wedding gown that felt heavier with every passing second, said nothing at all. There was no kiss, no exchange of promises, just a simple nod, an acceptance of a fate she couldn't escape. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, as if the world had turned mute in that moment. That night, Zara sat on the edge of a clean bed in a guest house she didn't recognize. The room smelled of cedar wood and something unfamiliar. Across from her, Tobias sat in a chair, engrossed in a book written in a language she didn't understand. He didn't come close. He didn't touch her. He simply handed her a bowl of soup and said, "You should eat." His voice was soft, almost too soft, and it made Zara uneasy. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her, but his words, gentle as they were, only confused her further. He slept in the room next door, locking the door between them from his side. Zara stayed awake long into the night, clutching a photograph of her brother, the only piece of home she had left. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, and the question that consumed her was one she couldn't answer. What does he want from me, if not what all the others whispered? She had been prepared for cruelty, for obedience, for silence, but this was different. Tobias treated her like glass, not fragile out of pity, but valuable. Each day, he brought her clean dresses in soft, calming colors, served her tea precisely at 4 p.m. with honey and a small cookie wrapped in linen, and yet he never touched her. He never raised his voice. He never looked at her the way others had, with hunger in their eyes, with expectation. And somehow, that made everything worse. Zara couldn't understand him. She couldn't understand this life she had been thrust into. By the third night, Zara's curiosity could no longer be contained. She slipped from her bed and crept toward the library door. Tobias was there again, just like every night, sitting in the same brown armchair, reading under the warm glow of an old lamp. But this time, something was different. His focus wasn't on the book. He was staring into a mirror, not brushing his hair, not shaving, just staring at his own reflection. His face was paler than usual, and his lips trembled slightly, as though he were whispering something under his breath. Zara stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, Tobias invited her to walk with him through the forest trail behind the lodge. He handed her a pair of boots, a scarf, and a notebook. "You should write," he said, his tone calm, "even if it's just your thoughts." Zara squinted at him, her mind racing with questions. "Why?" "Because stories make sense of things," he replied softly. He paused for a moment, and then added in a quieter voice, "I think you'll need that soon." The way he said it, like he knew something she didn't, sent a chill down Zara's spine. It unsettled her. By the fifth day, Zara noticed something else. There was a room at the end of the hall, a heavy wooden door with a brass handle that wouldn't turn. She asked about it once, her voice small, barely above a whisper. Tobias smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "Some doors aren't ready to open yet." But Zara wasn't a child anymore. She had been poor. She had seen death. She had said goodbye to innocence the day she wore a wedding dress meant for someone 3 times her age. That night, with Tobias gone into town, Zara found herself standing in front of that locked door. Her heart raced as she picked the lock. Inside, she found a room full of secrets. Photographs lined the walls. Children from different parts of the world, some smiling, some not. Dates were written under each frame, but some had an X marked over them. Some had no date at all. In the corner of the room, a wooden trunk stood quietly. Inside, Zara found more notebooks, letters. One letter caught her eye. It was addressed to someone named Marisol, a girl no older than Zara. "Dear Marisol," it began, "you're probably 17 now. I still think about you, your laughter. I hope you kept the violin. I'm sorry I had to leave so soon." Another letter, this one addressed to Chica. "The stars were always brightest when you sang. I hope you found your mother. I hope you still sing." And then, a fresh one, barely a week old. This one was for Zara. "You don't know yet, but you will. I just hope I live long enough to see you smile for real." Zara's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in shock. Why was her name here? Why had Tobias written her a goodbye letter before she even knew it? She spun around, almost screaming, but there he stood, Tobias, in the doorway, his expression not angry, but tired, as if the weight of the truth was too much for him to carry. "I suppose it's time you knew," he said quietly. Zara stood frozen in the dim light, clutching the letter to her chest. Her voice trembled. "Knew what?" Tobias stepped into the room, his face etched with years of regret. "That I didn't marry you for me," he said softly. "I married you for you." Zara's heart sank. What did that mean? Tobias walked slowly toward one of the photographs on the wall, pausing to study it. It was of a girl in a yellow dress, her arms flung wide as she laughed beneath a blossom tree. "This was Amira," Tobias said, his voice softening. "From Morocco. She had a stutter, but when she read poetry, you'd swear God himself was speaking through her. She died when she was 14. Malaria. Her village didn't have clean water." Zara's mouth trembled. "Are these all girls you married?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," he replied firmly. "They were all girls I found. Girls in danger. Girls being sold, forgotten, thrown away. I didn't marry any of them," he said, turning to face her fully. "You're the first." Zara's heart beat faster as his words sank in. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. Tobias sighed, sitting in a small chair across the room. "Because you were going to be married off anyway. You just didn't know it yet." That night, as Tobias went into town, Zara's curiosity led her to the locked room at the end of the hall. Her heart pounded in her chest as she picked the lock with trembling fingers. Inside, she found a room unlike any she had ever seen, one that seemed frozen in time, a museum of secrets. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them, children from all over the world. Some were smiling, their faces lit with innocent joy, while others were not, their expressions a silent testament to lives hard-lived. Each photograph had a date beneath it, but some dates had an X marked over them. Others had no date at all. Zara's breath quickened as she walked further into the room, her eyes scanning the faces. In the corner, a wooden trunk stood quietly, as if holding its own dark stories. Inside, she found more notebooks and letters. She pulled one letter out, its paper slightly worn, as if it had been read many times. It was addressed to Marisol. "Dear Marisol," it began, "you're probably 17 now. I still think about you. Your laughter. I hope you kept the violin. I'm sorry I had to leave so soon." Another letter, this one to Chica, read, "The stars were always brightest when you sang. I hope you found your mother. I hope you still sing." Zara's hands shook as she pulled out the next letter, one that had been written only a week ago. It was addressed to her. "To Zara," it began. "You don't know yet, but you will. I just hope I live long enough to see you smile for real." Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Why was her name here? Why had he written her a goodbye letter before she even knew him? Her heart raced. She turned around, the letter clutched tightly to her chest, only to freeze in her tracks. Tobias stood in the doorway, his face not angry, but tired, almost weary, as though the weight of his secrets had finally caught up with him. "I suppose it's time you knew," he said quietly. Zara stood frozen in the dimly lit room, her heart pounding in her chest. The letter trembled in her hand. "Knew what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. This story isn't over yet. Subscribe and continue to enjoy how Zara's journey unfolds. Tobias stepped into the room, gently closing the door behind him. He didn't scold her for unlocking the door. He didn't demand answers. Instead, he walked over to one of the photos on the wall, an image of a young girl in a yellow dress, laughing under a blossom tree. Her name was Amira, he said, his voice soft, almost tender. She was from Morocco. She had a stutter, but when she read poetry, it was like hearing the voice of God himself. She died at 14, from malaria. Her village didn't have clean water. Zara's heart clenched in her chest as he pointed to another photograph. "This is Leon," he continued, his voice steady but laced with sadness. "She was from southern China. Abandoned at birth. I paid for her surgeries. She wanted to become a nurse, but she didn't make it either." Zara's throat tightened as the weight of his words settled on her. "Are these all girls you married?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," he said firmly. "They were all girls I found. Girls in danger. Girls who were sold, forgotten, thrown away. I didn't marry any of them." He turned to face her fully, his eyes filled with a depth of pain that Zara couldn't yet understand. "You're the first." Zara's eyes narrowed. "Then why me?" she asked, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. Tobias walked slowly to a small chair and eased himself into it with a sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 70 years of regret. "Because you were going to be married off anyway," he said softly, his voice carrying the burden of a decision he had made long before. "You just didn't know it yet." Her heart dropped. She felt the ground beneath her shift as the truth slowly sank in. Tobias continued, "I'd heard rumors in the village. A foreign businessman, a Russian, had been buying wives under the table. Girls even younger than you. Your family was in debt. He was going to come to your mother with an offer." Zara stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. "You're lying," she whispered. "I wish I were." His voice cracked slightly, the sorrow in it palpable. "I knew I had only two options. Let that man get to you first, or get there before him." Zara's eyes darted around the room, her thoughts a whirlpool of confusion. The photographs on the walls, these weren't trophies. They were memorials. For the next hour, Tobias told her everything. How he had spent the last 20 years traveling the world, searching for vulnerable girls in desperate situations. Orphans, street children, abandoned daughters. He did what little he could to help. Sometimes he paid for their schooling. Sometimes he built wells in villages. Other times, he adopted them legally. But other times, the system made it impossible, and so he worked quietly, silently, off the record. Zara interrupted him once. "Why not use your money publicly? Build an organization, a school. You're rich, right?" Tobias smiled bitterly, his eyes filled with something that resembled regret. "I was. I sold most of it to fund these missions. But even money has limits. The law protects the powerful and punishes the poor. I learned early that the only way to reach girls like you, trapped in places the world forgot, was to go there myself." He looked her dead in the eye. "I married you because that was the only way I could buy time to protect you, to give you a choice. One you were never going to have." Zara didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, her legs pulled tightly to her chest, the letter still clutched in her trembling hands. The words echoed in her mind, over and over, like a soft chant she couldn't escape. She thought about the life she almost lived, the life she might have had if not for Tobias, the quiet American man who had given her a contract instead of a command, a pin instead of a cage, a choice instead of chains. And as the night stretched on, Zara realized something that made her chest ache with both sorrow and gratitude. He hadn't saved her because he had to. He had saved her because no one else would. The next morning, Zara awoke to the silence of an empty house. Tobias was nowhere to be found. Not at breakfast, not at the garden bench, not in the library, where he often read in the late hours of the evening. The place felt colder, emptier without him, as though the house itself had lost its warmth. Zara knocked gently on his bedroom door, but there was no answer. Her heart raced as she slowly opened the door. Tobias was there, lying peacefully on his side, still in his robe, pale, quiet. He was gone. The doctors would later say it was congestive heart failure, a quiet ending to a life that had moved too quickly, too silently. Zara stood frozen in the doorway, her breath catching in her chest. Tobias had known. He had known it was coming. That's why he had been so urgent. That's why he had moved faster than usual. That's why he had chosen her. He hadn't married her out of desire. He had married her to give her a choice. He had been dying, and he didn't want to leave this world without giving one last girl a chance. A chance at freedom. A chance to live. Inside the bedside drawer, Zara found a sealed envelope addressed to her. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "Zara," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. But that's okay. I've lived my life. Now it's time for you to live yours. You'll find documents in the study. Your name is now on everything I own, land, savings, property. But the most important thing I leave you isn't money. It's freedom. Don't waste it." Zara's heart swelled with emotion. She wept, not from fear or sadness, but from love. She had never known love like this, not from a man who had saved her, not out of pity, but because he believed in her. He had seen something in her, something she had never seen in herself. And now he was gone. The news of Tobias's death spread quickly. At first, it was just a whisper among the staff, a call to a lawyer in the city. But soon, it spread like wildfire through the village. People came to the front gate with flowers, with folded hands, with questions they didn't dare ask aloud. What no one expected, however, was the will. Days later, a lawyer arrived in a black car, clutching a sealed portfolio. Inside was a handwritten testament, notarized and legally binding. Zara, barely 12 years old, was named as Tobias's sole heir. The villagers were stunned. Some whispered blessings, others muttered curses. Her mother fainted in the yard. The elders met in secret. Children pointed from alleyways. How could that girl own the land now? She had been nothing but a poor nobody. Just a week ago, she had been married off to Tobias to trick the system. It was witchcraft, they said. But Zara said nothing. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just listened quietly, as Tobias had once taught her. Inside the lodge, she sat in his library, surrounded by the same books he had read, eating the same soup he had once made for her. The silence was deafening, but she didn't mind it anymore. 3 days later, Tobias's lawyer, a woman named Miss Barrow, returned with a folder full of transition documents. "There's enough money to last you until university and beyond," Miss Barrow said gently. "You don't have to decide anything now, but we'll need to name a legal guardian to oversee the estate until you're of age." Zara looked up at her, her heart heavy with the weight of it all. "Do I have to leave?" Miss Barrow was surprised. "No," she replied softly. "This house is yours. Tobias made it clear that you can stay as long as you like." Zara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The truth of it hit her in waves. She had her own bed, her own books, her own keys, and now her own decisions. The first one she made shocked everyone. She reopened Tobias's ledgers and directed Miss Barrow to withdraw part of his remaining funds, not for herself, but for the children in the village. She ordered repairs for the clinic that had once rejected her brother. She had a school built where she had once sold herbs in the dust. She gave quiet instructions. Any girl under the age of 14 could no longer be married off, not without being reported to a new registry managed from her estate. Some called her dangerous. Some called her cursed. But others started calling her something else, the girl who came back with fire. One afternoon, Zara walked alone to the cemetery at the edge of the village, carrying a photo frame, the one of Tobias's favorite picture, of a mirror under a blossom tree. She placed it beside his fresh grave and whispered softly, "You weren't my husband. You were never even my father." She knelt, her eyes full of quiet power. "You were my lighthouse." The wind moved through the trees, and for just a second, Zara could have sworn she heard Tobias's voice. "I always did." Zara sat back, her heart beating faster as the truth hit her in waves. She had her own bed, her own books, her own keys, and now her own decisions. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. She had been given the chance to choose her own life, something she had never believed possible. And the first choice she made shocked everyone. She reopened Tobias's ledgers, her fingers trembling as she skimmed through the records he had kept so meticulously. She directed Miss Barrow, the lawyer, to withdraw part of his remaining funds, not for herself, but for the children in the village who had been forgotten, ignored, abandoned. Zara ordered repairs to the clinic that had once rejected her brother, the same place that had turned her family away when they needed help the most. She had a school built in the very spot where she had once sold herbs to survive, a school for the children who deserved better than a life of hardship and despair. But Zara's influence didn't stop there. She gave quiet instructions that no girl under the age of 14 could be married off without being reported to a new registry, one managed from her estate. The law had changed, and so had the lives of countless girls who would never have to endure what she had. Some people called her dangerous. Others called her cursed. But others started calling her something else, the girl who came back with fire. One afternoon, Zara walked alone to the cemetery at the edge of the village. She carried a photo frame, Tobias's favorite, the one of a mirror under the blossom tree. She knelt beside his fresh grave, the weight of her emotions crashing over her like a wave. "You weren't my husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were never even my father." She knelt, her eyes filled with quiet power, the same strength Tobias had seen in her all along. "You were my lighthouse," she said softly, her heart aching for the man who had given her a chance she would never forget. The wind moved through the trees, and Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his absence and the strength of his legacy. Weeks passed, then months, and the lodge that had once been a place of fear and confusion became a sanctuary, a home for young girls who had nowhere else to go. It wasn't just a house, it was a place where they could read, where they could sleep without fear, and where they could heal. One girl, Fatima, had been rescued from a forced engagement at just 9 years old. Another, Benta, only 11, had been hiding from an abusive uncle. They had found their way to Zara's gates, and Zara let them in, not as a queen, not as a savior, but as one of them. She had been where they were. She understood their pain. But even as Zara built this new life, even as she helped more and more girls find safety, the shadows of the world outside still loomed. One rainy evening, Zara discovered a final envelope hidden inside one of Tobias's book covers. She opened it slowly, and inside was a simple message: "If they come for you, don't be afraid." Her hands shook as she read the rest. The letter contained a list of names, dates, and addresses, dozens of them. Men, government officials, diplomats, criminals. Some of them were tied to child marriage, trafficking, and the very underworld that Tobias had been fighting against for years. He hadn't just saved girls. He had been documenting the monsters. Zara's heart pounded as she reached the last line of the letter. Tobias's final handwritten words echoed in her mind. "Use your voice, Zara. Burn the dark. They can't kill light when it knows who it is." And that's when Zara made her second decision. She wouldn't just build homes for girls. She would build a movement. She would take everything Tobias had taught her, everything he had left her, and she would change the world. 1 year later, the world knew her name. Zara Langston, no longer a child bride in a forgotten village, but a global voice for girls like herself. Her story had gone viral when a journalist from Lagos came to investigate rumors about a 12-year-old inheriting a foreign man's estate. But what they found was more than just a headline. They found a revolution. Zara had grown, not just taller, but stronger. The girl who once whispered her fears now stood firm, her voice still soft but undeniably powerful. When she spoke, ministers listened. When she wrote, people shared her words across the world. When she walked into a courtroom, traffickers flinched, knowing that the girl they once overlooked had become their worst nightmare. With the help of Miss Barrow, the lawyer who had become her ally, Zara launched the Langston Report, a chilling dossier that exposed international child marriage networks, corrupt officials who took bribes, and villages where young girls were auctioned like property behind closed doors. The report shook the world to its core. Some tried to silence her. They threatened her. They hacked into her accounts. They lied about her. But it was too late. Tobias hadn't just left her a house. He had left her proof. He had left her a plan. And most importantly, he had left her an army of survivors, teachers, and quiet donors from Tobias's past work, all inspired to speak up, stand tall, and fund her future. By age 14, Zara had spoken at the United Nations. By 15, she had helped change legislation in 3 African countries, making child marriage under the age of 16 punishable by international law. Her work was far from over, and by 16, she had returned to her village, not with guards or cameras, but alone. She stood in front of the school she had built, surrounded by girls who laughed, who learned, who lived freely, without fear of the life she had once been forced into. She smiled, her heart full of pride. "I used to be afraid of silence," she told them, her voice steady with the power of her words. "But now I know, silence is where we grow strong." One of the girls raised her hand, curiosity lighting her eyes. "Are you a queen now?" Zara laughed softly. "No, queens wear crowns," she said with a gentle shake of her head. She tapped her temple. "I carry fire." That night, Zara sat in Tobias's old library, now filled with even more books, more drawings, and more letters from the girl she had saved, letters filled with gratitude and hope. She lit a candle, the flame flickering brightly in the still room, casting shadows that danced along the walls. She opened her journal, wrote a few words, and whispered softly to the night, "I hope you see me now." A breeze moved through the room, the scent of cedar wood filling the air. For just a moment, Zara closed her eyes and could have sworn she heard Tobias's voice, soft and steady, as if he were right there beside her. "I always did." In a world full of challenges, let's keep telling these powerful stories together. Show your support and help us reach 1K subscribers. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like and share.